And we thought there were some models that we had. One was Primary Colors, Richard Ben Kramer's extraordinary book about 1988. Primary Colors, sorry. No. What It Takes.
Yes.
Thank you. And then also the movie The Queen, which is about a more overcovered story than even this election, the death of Diana. But it's the background of the principles and how they experienced it, with the added challenge of making sure it was all reported so it's fully accurate. And then, as I said, we outlined together, we passed back and forth and wrote together.
And don't you think maybe you did something that the Queen also achieved, is that you made people who could be very unsympathetic ultimately sympathetic? Is that?
We like to think we achieved that, because we certainly went for that. Some of the early accounts of the book suggested that one character, one person or another, received unrelentingly negative coverage in some cases. That's closer to the truth, but in a lot of cases, I think people are wrong.
Hillary Clinton, I can think of two or three people that you can say that about, but didn't they do it to themselves?
Well, I'll probably leave that to others to say for sure. But Hillary Clinton, for instance, some people have said it's a relentlessly negative portrait of Hillary Clinton. Many of the earliest readers of the book happen to be people who aren't particularly fond of her, and their reaction was, "I've never felt so much sympathy for her. I've never understood her strengths as much as I do now."
Well, let me just take one example where I think that you put a dimension to it that never came through in the day-to-day reporting, was when she would say she did not cry, but let's say she puddled up, to use Nancy Reagan's words, in New Hampshire. Well, everybody did look at that cynically. They did think that that was just a tactic. But you put it in a context. She'd come from a very rough meeting. You want to talk about that meeting?
She had just come from a meeting that morning with her campaign manager, Patty Doyle, who was her longest and most ardent loyalist. She had started.
What did you say? She'd crawl through broken glass for Hillary?
And walk through a wall simultaneously, yeah. I think. And you know, there had been many people who had told Hillary that Patty Doyle was not the right person to manage her campaign. And Hillary's main reason for clinging to Patty was this loyalty, this fierce loyalty that she displayed over the course of more than a decade. And now, on the morning of the New Hampshire primary, Patty Doyle had with Hillary the morning before the New Hampshire primary.
Coming off of Iowa,
4 days
had been
after
pretty
Iowa,
brutal too.
Where she had just finished third. Patty sits down with Hillary and says that, suggests to her that it might be that it's time to quit.
Yes.
And that moment is a sort of stunning moment for Hillary Clinton.
It's stunning even to read in your book that somebody would have gone to Hillary Clinton, of all people, that early and say, it's time to quit.
And someone who knew her as well as Patty did.
Right.
And it was clear that Patty was not telling her she had to quit, but she was they were expecting to lose New Hampshire, and she was saying, look, you don't want to embarrass yourself if you lose here, the rest of the race looks bad. The money is going to dry up. You're going to lose in Nevada. You're going to lose in South Carolina. Why not preserve some integrity?
It was a bucket of bad news that she dumped on her, and then bang, she walks into this little breakfast or lunch or whatever it was.
Right.
So the way, when you put it in context, all of a sudden it is very sympathetic, and you think, who wouldn't cry when given that sort of triggering question? And I had not really read before about that meeting that she'd had. So that was something that you had that nobody else had?
People have written a little bit about that period between her and Patty, but the fullness of both that meeting and then another emotional meeting they had the next day, I think we have a fuller tale than has been told about it. The other piece of it that added emotion, which is also part of that Monday meeting the day before the New Hampshire primary, is as Patty is reluctantly telling Hillary Clinton, you need to think about getting out because you're about to lose the first 4 races and, as you said, be broke. President Clinton walks in. He had been relatively uninvolved in 2007, and at this point, after the loss in Iowa, is becoming remarkably involved. And during this 5-day sprint in New Hampshire, the Clintons are basically co-campaign managers of her campaign. And part of the emotion, I think, besides this rupture with Patty and this recognition that her campaign may be about to end, is her husband and his history in New Hampshire, where he recounted to her, my aides told me in New Hampshire when I was going through the draft and Jennifer Flowers, I should get out of the race. And I said to them, the voters will vote me out. If I'm going to leave this race, the voters will do it.
The point you keep pounding through, page after page after page that has to do with the Clintons, is that they don't quit.
That's right. And in that moment, he said to her, if you think you'd be the best president, if you think you've got enough money to afford plane tickets to fly around and campaign, you should stay in the race. And so again, part of the emotion of that moment, if not the cause of her welling up, was recognizing that in her husband's eyes, quitting was a big sin, and
much worse than losing.
Right, so she wanted to go forward. But on that Monday morning, there was unanimity from her pollster and Barack Obama's 6 or 7 pollsters that she was going to lose. The public polls were all trending away from her. And the Clintons, we report in the book, from the day they got on the ground in New Hampshire, which they loved and where they had all these loyalists and memories from '92, juxtaposed to Iowa, where they felt alien and didn't understand the process, they kept saying, we can win this. Their aides thought they were nuts. You can't possibly win. The public polls are going dramatically against you. They thought they could win, and quitting was just not an option for them.
The only meltdown really comparable, it seems to me, between that period when Hillary lost Iowa and comes kind of stumbling into New Hampshire in a daze, is Sarah Palin when she's getting prepped for her first debate, and you describe her as catatonic. I mean, I think of the 2 principal women of the campaign, both having these moments where they really were on the ropes and had to go to the well, had to go to some special well inside them. I don't know if it's unique to politicians or perhaps unique to women politicians that we're going to find is that they both came back stronger from having gone down to the real dumps of it, don't you think?
Well, what's so striking about Sarah Palin in that context is
it's the only comparison I'm going to make with Sarah Palin and Hillary Clinton.
Is that she, we talk about in the book how and I say this without prejudice, at least in this moment, how just unprepared she was for what she was about to be faced with, the level of celebrity, the level of scrutiny. The McCain campaign was unprepared to defend her. She was unprepared for what was about to hit her. And in the earliest moments of her campaign, they are all stunned by how cool she is throughout it. I mean, we quote her on the plane on the way to her announcement saying, that the reason that she's so calm is that it's God's plan. But she does incredibly well at her convention speech. She manages to get through her first big media interview with Charlie Gibson. But there's so much going on, and there's so much scrutiny, and there's so much craziness in her personal life with her various children, one shipping off to Iraq, one a special needs child.
And this remarkable drama of her need about Alaska, everything's about Alaska.
Her obsession with Alaska, the incipient battle she's having with the campaign, and she gets to New York to do her interview with Katie Couric, and she makes the fatal mistake for Sarah Palin, which is she doesn't really prepare for that interview. She's prepared. The other thing, she crammed her way through, and she has a remarkable capacity for both memorization and for red light performance.
But she does it all with
her index cards. Hundreds and hundreds of index cards. So the
image you paint of
the Katie Couric interview is a disaster for her. And she knows it's a disaster, and that interview kind of gets leaked out, not leaked out, but dribbled out over the course of days. And it's happening just as she's going into her debate prep for Joe Biden. And at that moment, she kind of does have, I don't even think there's anything comparable. There's nothing comparable that Hillary Clinton goes through, because this is a moment where she is, by the accounts of everyone around her, very close to a nervous breakdown. She's not eating, she's not sleeping, she's not preparing.
They questioned her mental stability.
She's not answering questions. They're looking at her and thinking, we have a debate in 4 days, and when we try to prepare her and we ask her questions, she drops her chin to her chest and doesn't answer the questions. That's not a good sign.
It was interesting. No, it was interesting to me that nobody was working somebody in the background, thinking that she may be out of the campaign at any moment, and preparing somebody to be the next vice presidential nominee. That was they never seemed to have discussed that.
We actually have that story nailed, but we're saving it for the next book.
Oh.
There's a dynamic.
Well, who was it?
There's a dynamic that I think explains at least partially what you're getting at. That accounts in part for Sarah Palin's popularity today with a wing of the Republican Party, which is at the convention. John said she was unprepared, the campaign was unprepared. You'll recall, as we write in the book, all these questions come in. How was she picked? What does she know? What makes her qualified? What about her daughter's pregnancy? What about her child? Is it her child? Questions about, did she support the Bridge for Nowhere? All this stuff is coming in. And the national conservatives nationally at the convention and around the country saw in that moment someone who they were very attracted to kind of instinctually being harassed by the liberal national press. And so
about issues they could relate to.
Air quotes around liberal, please. So until